As anyone who listens to this program knows, I am a long and consistent opponent of the war on drugs and of U.S. policy toward the users of illegal drugs. I am also someone who advocates for a holistic view of reality, of its challenges and potential solutions, and of holistic healing. And I personally define holistic healing as first looking at the whole situation, the mind, the body, the emotions, the spirit, and the environment, and then of treating root causes rather than symptoms, and finally of treating as naturally and as safely as possible. Now, today's guest deals with issues of drugs and addiction holistically. Dr. GABOR Mate, for over 10 years, the staff physician at the Portland Hotel, North America's only supervised safe injection site in Vancouver's downtown Eastside, home to one of the world's densest areas of drug users. He's the author of When the Body Says No, Understanding the Stress-Disease Connection, and Scattered, How Attention Deficit Disorder Originates and What You Can Do About It, and his latest In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, which proposes new approaches to treating addiction through an understanding of its biological and its socio-economic roots. Welcome, GABOR Mate.
Pleasure to be here.
Let me say, first of all, that I saw you speak last Friday night to a packed audience, sponsored by an organization called Writers in Treatment, and you covered a wide gamut of things, and we'll just touch on some of them today. But I was I had read your book and was very pleased to finally meet you in person and hear you speak. I like listeners to know a little bit about the people behind the work and the ideas that we talk about on Freeform. So tell us a bit about your path to the work that you do today, and be willing to talk about mentors or moments of decision or that sort of thing along the way.
Sure. Well, I'm a medical doctor towards the end of my career as a practicing physician. At the moment, I'm too busy traveling and speaking and teaching. But I've worked for 20 years in family practice in Vancouver, British Columbia. For 7 years, I worked in palliative care, looking after terminally ill people. And for 12 years, I worked in the downtown Eastside, which, as you stated, is one of North America's most notorious and concentrated areas of drug use. My own journey involved not just my observations and experiences as a physician, but also dealing with my own mental health issues, emotional problems, and imbalances. And in the process of coming to terms with my own issues, I began to understand that the medical training I'd received, although obviously valuable and of great benefit in many ways, also was hopelessly too narrow and shallow in its approach to human beings. And primarily, what it comes down to is that the medical approach still separates the mind from the body, and it still looks at individuals as discrete entities rather than seeing us human beings as manifestations of a culture and in a physical and emotional environment. And so I've come to understand that whether we try to deal with cancer or rheumatoid arthritis or colitis or any mental illness, depression, anxiety, ADHD, with which I've been diagnosed, whether we're talking about addictions or any dysfunction of human mind, body, or spirit, we have to understand that we're all connected, that people are not separate from their environment, that we're shaped very much by what happens to us, particularly in our childhoods, and that disease, in the end, is not the source of the problem, it's just a manifestation of a lifelong disconnection, really, from ourselves, and that at the same time, when disease arises, it's also an opportunity for healing, which actually means wholeness, which is to say to get back to who we actually are. So I approach illness from the perspective of what is that illness telling us about the individual at that particular time of their lives, which is not to say that, therefore, I would reject or eschew conventional medical treatment. Often that can be very helpful, but it's not the ultimate answer.
Right. So from hearing your response, it strikes me that the three sort of principles that I laid out at the top of my view, which is dealing with the whole person, including the environment in which they are, and treating root causes rather than symptoms, and as naturally and safely as possible, sounds like we're pretty much in sync.
Sounds like it would be. You have to understand, I'm a medical doctor. I'm not trained in, say, homeopathy or naturopathy or Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine of India. So I know what I know how to do, But I'm also very open to people choosing alternative therapies. As a matter of fact, it's just a reality that Western medicine has got very limited responses to most chronic conditions, and whether they be physical conditions like multiple sclerosis or mental health conditions like depression or addiction, the Western medical approach in which I've been trained, again, is very limited in its responses. So we have to look beyond it. And certainly when it comes to understanding the causes, we really do have to look at people's lives and the social milieu in which those lives were lived.
What does it mean to say the only legal injection site in North America? Could you tell people?
Well, you're referring to a place called Insight, INSITE, which is administered by the Portland Hotel Society here in Vancouver. It's a facility where people who are addicted can bring their illegal drugs like heroin or cocaine without the fear of being arrested and under supervised conditions with lights and a mirror and a sink where they can wash themselves and sterile swabs that they're provided with clean water and clean needles. And under the supervision of a nurse, they can inject their substances. Obviously, the benefits demonstrated by many medical studies are that people don't transmit HIV and hepatitis C or other infectious diseases to one another. People don't suffer the consequences of using dirty needles or dirty water to inject with, so that there's less disease generated. The consequences are that there's less injection in the streets, fewer crack vials and drug needles strewed around the neighborhood, and a lot of money is saved because of the preventive aspect in terms of disease transmission. And finally, of course, people, drug addicts who have had a very tough life, they all began life as abused children. That's the universal template for severe addiction, is childhood trauma. These people have a place where they feel accepted and safe for the first time in their lives. So it's a beginning of the possibility of treatment.
Very good. So
all of which means that Canada's Conservative government is right now trying to shut down the place.
That was my next question. What is the situation in Vancouver, the city, British Columbia, the province, and Canada, the country, in terms of how this, what I think is an aspect of a harm reduction philosophy rather than a criminalization philosophy? How does this all work?
Well, it is a harm reduction measure, and harm reduction means that you reduce the harm. So naturally, when you prevent the transmission of HIV, you're reducing the harm from the addictive behavior. You haven't treated the addiction, but you reduce the harm from it. That's a necessary first step. On a civic level, on the provincial level, here in British Columbia, it's well accepted, and the governments at all levels are in favor of it. On the federal level, we have a very right-wing conservative government right now. In fact, as I'm being interviewed today, there's a federal election in this country. But the federal government in this country is has shaped itself very much to the right of the George Bush conservatives, and for purely ideological reasons, under the completely false and demonstrably baseless idea that somehow we're supporting or condoning addiction. They're trying to shut the place down, despite the demonstrated evidence of economic and health benefits. So it's purely an ideological concern. It's the same kind of thing that, until the Obama administration prevented the American federal government from funding HIV programs that involved needle exchange. Even though, of course, needle exchange is one of the best ways, clean needles is one of the best ways to prevent HIV transmission. So it's one of those political initiatives that have nothing to do with health or humanity or compassion, and everything to do with the right-wing agenda.
Right, and something to do with politics and the fact that when I look at the war on drugs here in the United States, I see that, the evidence makes that approach wrong. The cost-benefit analysis, everything, but it seems to have some political cachet out of some, tough on crime sort of thing that politicians, in their lack of courage, continue to perpetuate. And on the other side, there are interests, the correctional unions and what I would call the prison industrial complex, in whose interest perpetuating that approach goes, while for the rational millions of people who know that it does not, it is not quite as high on their agenda as it is on those institutions who benefit from it. Let's jump to the book In the Realm of Hungry Ghost. That's a provocative title, and what does it refer to?
Hungry Ghost is a Buddhist image. The Buddhist wheel of life cycles through 6 realms of human existence. There's the ordinary human realm, there's the hell realm of unbearable emotion like rage and terror, there's the animal realm of our passions and our instinctual drives and so on. The Hungry Ghost realm depicts creatures with large empty bellies, small scrawny necks, and tiny mouths, so that they're forever hungry and insatiable, but they can never fill that emptiness. And so they go around really haunting their lives, attempting to satisfy this inner void without ever being able to do so. And that, of course, is the realm of the addiction. And it's not that some people are here all the time and other people are there all the time. If we look at ourselves honestly, we can see that we all have that hungry ghost inside of us, to one degree or another. And the hardcore drug addicts, the hungry ghost dominates their life, but we can all recognize it in ourselves. I certainly can. And so it's a question of why do people get stuck or they gravitate towards the hungry ghost realm. It's because they're attempting to escape the hell realm of unbearable emotion. And if you look at, again, all people who are addicted to anything, it's always based on some degree of loss, emotional loss in childhood, particularly the loss of love. In the case of the extreme addict, it's trauma. And the research in California and elsewhere clearly shows that people who become addicted are traumatized individuals, either because they're directly abused or neglected or abandoned, or because they simply didn't get their needs met as children because their parents were too distracted or stressed or perhaps addicted themselves. But one way or the other, there's a void, there's an emptiness that then we spend all our lives trying to fill, and hence the hungry ghost image.
Mm-hmm, very powerful. So your sense of addiction, and you refer both to addiction and I think to serious addiction, or what was the word you used that sort of the
biopsychosocial?
Yeah, okay.
Well, you referred to that yourself. If that's what you mean.
Exactly.
In your introduction, you mentioned the...
Absolutely. And so there's a continuum here. And so one of the things I find interesting both in your writing and certainly when I saw you speak in person is your reference to your own challenges, your own issues and so on, thus saying that we all lie on this continuum. And it seems to me, speak a little bit just about your own personal experience, because I think, again, that brings things home to people in a way differently than ideas and data.
Well, addiction is a continuum, and some people are at the extreme end. That's usually because they suffered more extremely. But in this society, many of us find ourselves on that line somewhere along the way. I certainly do. My own particular addictions have been expressed in 2 major areas. One has been to work, which has meant that I've been a workaholic physician, which has meant that I drove myself too hard. I ignored my own family's needs. My children didn't have my peasants as a emotionally available father when they were small, and certainly my marriage relationship was affected negatively by my workaholic tendencies. My other addiction has been to the purchasing of compact discs. And I say addiction, it's, I love music, particularly classical music, but it's not the love of the music that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the need to acquire and to need to acquire more and more, and the need to acquire right now, this very second, that having to have that fixed immediately. So the addiction is never to the, in terms of behaviors, it's not to the external target, it's actually to the process of getting. The sex addict, for example, it's not so much sex that they enjoy as the need to be validated by being sexually accepted. So they have to keep proof to themselves all the time that they're lovable. So they're addicted to the hunt and to the quest and to the excitement of the search and the immediate fix. But then they have to go on to the next one because it never satiates and never satisfies. And it's the same at work. It's the same at shopping. So in our society, there's a whole continuum of these addictions. In fact, there's one universal addiction process, as I point out in the book, by which I mean that whether you're addicted to drugs, sex, or rock and roll, it's the same brain circuits that are involved. It's the same emotional imbalance, and it's the same spiritual emptiness that underlies it all. So the targets may vary from person to person, but the process is virtually identical.
Okay, you brought up there the brain circuits. Talk a little bit about the what's going on in the neurotransmitters in terms of addiction, in terms of drug use, and in terms of the wounding that brought that all about.
Sure. Well, if you look at which brain circuits are involved in addiction, you find that these circuits are essential brain centers for human life. We're talking about here about the brain's internal or endogenous opiate circuits, or pain-relieving circuits, which is, say, the endorphins, endorphin meaning endogenous morphine-like substance. These circuits facilitate pain relief, pleasure and reward, and also they help to facilitate our love relationships. So you can see how a person who's lacking endorphins would be desperate for some relief from a lack of love, from too much pain, and from a lack of pleasure and reward. Other circuits involved in addiction are the brain's incentive and motivation circuits, which involve the chemical dopamine, the brain chemical dopamine, which again is essential for human life. Without it, we have no incentive or motivation, no vitality, no curiosity. And all stimulant drugs, for example, elevate dopamine levels. In fact, all drugs work on the dopamine incentive motivation system. And these circuits and other essential brain circuits involved in addiction require, for their healthy development, a nurturing, attuned, calm, balanced, and consistent parenting environment. And to the extent that those conditions are not available to the small child, the brain does not get the environmental input that it requires, and those circuits will not develop optimally. And therefore, people will be prone to try to supplant or supplement those chemicals by outside means, whether through drugs or through these behaviors that can release them in the brain. So the addiction reflects not just a psychological need, but very much a physiological imbalance, which is the result of early childhood adversity.
Very good. I'm Terence McNally. That's the voice of Gabor Mate, physician and author of several books, including In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction. You can learn more at drgabormate.com, drgabormate.com. Let me ask one other source of can we become addicted to our own stress? Does can the unconscious desire to trigger the stress mechanism actually become something people become addicted to? It's my suspicion that that's so.
Well, absolutely. People become addicted to their own stress hormones. The great Canadian, Hungarian-born, actually, like myself, stress researcher Hans Selye, who did the pioneering work on stress in the mammalian body. He pointed out that people can be addicted to their own stress hormones, which is to say adrenaline and cortisol. So there are adrenaline junkies, which is to say that when they're not stressed, when they're not in a highly intense situation, they go through withdrawal and listlessness and irritability, just like any addict going through withdrawal would. So that means people are generating stress for themselves just to feel okay about themselves. And that's usually because they were brought up under very stressed and tense and intense circumstances, and that's what strikes them as normal. So when that isn't available, they just don't feel like themselves.
I mean, that's a very powerful thing. I think if one looks at certainly the society that the U.S. society, the Los Angeles society, and so on, it seems to me that that's an insight that's very helpful, actually.
Yes, and it very much describes L.A. culture, I think. And when you want to see how true it is, what happens to people when they don't have those activities that can keep them in a state of tension?
Yeah. What does what is your sense of the current habituation, at least, if not addiction, to screens, text messages, Facebook accounts, and so on. Do you have a sense of what's happening?
First of all, addiction is always about some external focus. So rather than being internally directed, we're looking for the outside to be excited and satisfied. So the screens provide that, number one. Number two, in this culture, because especially amongst young people, there's such a lack of connection with nurturing adults. Children and young people become connected to one another, and this becomes addictive. So that the addiction to technology is not simply an addiction to technology itself. It's also an addiction to peer contact. So they have to be in touch with each other all the time. Hence all the twittering and the texting and the emailing and the Skyping and all that. So that it has to do with loss of connection originally to nurturing adults. That's being replaced by a desperation to belong to the peer group. And now we have the technology that keeps people connected to the peer group all the time. Even when they're not physically in each other's presence, they can be in a kind of virtual contact.
Now
and then there is this specific addiction to things on the internet like pornography and so on. There's news junkies, people who just have to have the news all the time. Why? Because they're empty inside.
And this bit of news, this something promises novelty, promises a little moment of stimulation.
This morning you can spend hours reading about how Osama bin Laden is dead. Well,
right.
There's only one fact: he's dead.
That's right.
All the rest of it is simply verbiage. But people have the need to be engaged with it, for hours and hours and hours because they're lacking something inside. Mm-hmm. They're not getting more information that in any way will help them live a better life. They're simply indulging themselves in the need to be externally stimulated. That's what a news junkie is.
I want to talk in most of the time we have left about healing and solutions, but one more point I want to touch on before we get to that is ADD or ADHD.
Right. Well, what do you wish to address there?
Well, in other words, how does it fit into these same
sure.
sources?
Well, it's not surprising that the first three letters of the word addiction is ADD, because there's a huge overlap between addictions and ADD. Both ADD and addictions involve a lack of the dopamine chemical in the brain, which is what we supply to people when we give them Ritalin or Dexedrine. We're elevating dopamine levels, so that in both conditions there's a lack of the incentive chemical, number one. Number two, both conditions involve poor impulse control. People don't know how to regulate their impulses, so they act things out, even though it's bad for them. That's clear about ADD and about addictions. And they both, in my view, represent not genetic conditions, contrary to the dominant medical perspective, but they represent the result of childhood stress. So I have ADD, my kids do. I don't think I passed it on to them genetically. I passed it on to them because they had a stressed childhood, just like I had one.
Right.
And that shapes the brain in certain ways. That research on brain development is not even controversial anymore. Much of it was done, or at least collated at UCLA and in Los Angeles, but it's still not taught in the medical school. So the medical profession still looks on these conditions as inherited diseases rather than for what they are, which are conditions induced by environmental stress and which can be reversed if we change people's environment.
Right. So that's Dr. GABOR Mate. Let's talk in the few minutes we have left about healing, recovery, and when you spoke the other day, you made the point that recovery implies that we're recovering something that may already be there, something that is essential, and now we are recovering it. But what are the solutions for whether it's a child with ADD or whether it's a person with a severe addiction? What is the path of healing and solution?
Well, if we understand that we're not dealing with genetically determined conditions, but the impact on brain development and personality and psychological functioning of early experience, and we also realize, again, which is not controversial, that the human brain has got the capacity to reshape itself based on new experiences, then the question we'll be asking is not simply how do we control symptoms through medications or how do we change behaviors, but how actually do we promote new development. And that has to do with whether you're dealing with adult addicts or children with ADD, not just in dealing with the symptoms, but also providing them with the right conditions of healing. And the right conditions basically can be summed up as providing for people that which they didn't get in the first place, which is attuned, compassionate, and nurturing relationships. And all of that is explained in detail in my books on ADD and addiction, respectively. But the essential point to grasp is that in neither case are we dealing with conditions that are written in genetic stone, and therefore they're reversible, and therefore we have to be asking ourselves, if we want people to develop, whether they're children or adults, what conditions do we have to provide for them? Because development is always a matter of conditions. You know, if you're a gardener and if your plant is not developing properly, you'll be asking yourself, what condition does that plant require? It's the same thing with human beings.
So, are you, in other words, the site where you have helped in Vancouver, that is a harm reduction site and so on, that deals with one aspect of this. This will be the last question. Where are these recovery and healing situations taking place? Where can listeners learn more, and what can listeners do if they want to move on these issues?
Well, you know, unfortunately, these are more ideals and ideas than realized practicalities, because the social emphasis, as you pointed out, is on the war on drugs, and all the money is going into fighting something that cannot be fought, as opposed to healing something that could be healed. But you know, there are organizations and facilities all over the place. In California, in San Diego, there's a wonderful organization called Practical Recovery. It's worth checking out on the net.
Very good.
There's an organization called Smart Recovery. You look it up, smartrecovery.org.
Very good.
There are groups and therapists and support institutions or support facilities all over the place, but you know, I don't have access to them all. But the point is, you have to keep looking. And the point is that you have to keep, and then, of course, the 12-step groups, which are, I don't think they have the whole answer, but they can provide a lot of help as well. If people just understand that the capacity for wholeness and health resides inside them, that if they keep looking, they will find the help they need.
Very good. The book is In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction. The website to learn more is drgabormate.com, drgabormate.com. You can listen to this week's conversation and many others anytime during the week by linking to the podcast. You can sign up to have that delivered to you weekly. You can do either of those things at iTunes or at terrencemcnally.net. Same website is aworldthatjustmightwork.com. You can sign up there to get my weekly announcement telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and some background. You can also do that by emailing me at temcnally@mac.com. And thank you so much, Gabor Mate, for making the time this morning and for the wonderful work that you do.
My pleasure to speak with you, Terrence. Thank you.
Okay, very well.